Hey there, and welcome to a new video on how to play Ultra Historical more properly. This time we're taking a look at the first steps that you have to take as the Soviet Union. To be more precisely, we start with a focus. Contrary to what a lot of people might think, it's not infrastructure effort. Gonna start best with foster flying clubs, then expand the aircraft industry, since expand the aircraft industry will give you a decision to build more factories. And those you need to get finished the 5-year plan. Otherwise, you're gonna run into some trouble fulfilling this before Stalin triggers his paranoia and goes ham on your political power and everything. And also, this is locked as long as Stalin goes ham. So yeah, you want to get this one. It also grants Lazar Kaganovich, who is important later on. So obviously, that's focus stuff. So that focus, and then you can continue with this stuff. And obviously, as usual in vanilla, combat his paranoia. Research. I personally prefer to not research anything here for the time being. Same here. Not necessary. The sniper rifle is nice to have, but it's not really necessary. The most important thing, in my opinion, early on is the signal company. Just put that under research. With mechanical computing, which is very important here. Besides that, you can basically do what you prefer. I personally do not research the BT-7A. I prefer the flamethrower version of the Tu-23-6 since it is cheaper. They are both assault guns. Obviously, the BT-7A is better, but not significantly so in terms of anything, and you don't only need them for the fins, so it's not really like the armor is going to count a lot. What you can also do is research the BA-20 to get access to a more modern armored car. But on the other hand, you already have the BA-6, which is a great armored car early on with an excellent gun. And the next one, the BA-10, which is even better, is not going to be available until 1938. So not necessary to research the BA-20 at this point. So basically, you can do with those research slots what you prefer. Again, a sniper rifle is an option so that you can put the sniper sections into your heavy infantry equipment. The PF-43 class armored train is also an option to get access to the railway guns, since those are really useful in the defense against the Germans. You can also go for some kind of bomber here. The DB3 is an excellent bomber that you can produce for a long time. I personally prefer to stick to the light bombers usually, but obviously you can do both, or you can do only medium bombers. It's absolutely fine. The light bomber line here has the benefit that you can basically only produce light bombers until you get the Tu-2. You don't need to research really anything under pressure here and put it into production. The Tupolev SB is good enough. DB3 is better, has longer range, and the DB3M takes over efficiency, so that is also an option if you want to go for more power in the air. I like more numbers usually. It's not a huge difference, as you can see here, so yeah, it's just that you don't need to research it. But you can do. The range is really not bad, so it's a thing of personal preference. Alright, production. I prefer to have at least factories on trains early on and probably increase that later on. Let's stick with 5 for now. Light tanks, I prefer to have at least that one, but not on light tanks, but instead the HT-26, just because I like it. It's probably more efficient to not have it running on it. But again, I like having it early on against Finland. Not that important in single player, but in multiplayer it can help if there's actually a player on Finland. So you don't need the heavy tank here, so just cancel that. The medium tanks you can probably reduce to like 3 factories. In return, you increase towed artillery a little bit, since you will need it. Heavy artillery, you can probably let run on this. It depends on what you like. I like to have more heavy artillery in our tank divisions, but since you're gonna not use heavy artillery anywhere else outside of the tank divisions, why produce it? Towed anti-tank, not really needed at the start. In the long run, you're gonna need it, so keep that single factory on it. AA probably up to 2. Then put about 20 to 30 factories on trucks, and then put basically everything else into infantry equipment. That is because you will need a lot of it. So we have 101 factories. We now have 40 on this. Gonna put 15 on the heavy infantry equipment because it's being produced at a lower rate. You also need less of it, but it's also pretty expensive. So you will probably have to adjust a little bit so that it fits properly into your production plan. Pack infantry weapons is something that I tend to cancel as the Soviets, while In single player, at least, their mountaineers have some validity in the long run. They don't really become as important as they can be until 1943, and then that template is outdated severely. So yeah, you can usually cancel that. Support equipment, obviously very important, especially when you later on get the signals. So you should put some future factories into that. I tend to not produce the FAI, as I already told you guys. Instead, I usually go for the BA6 here. So it's not outdated anymore and now has a proper cannon. The fighters, dive bombers and transport plane are virtually useless early on, and you have a big enough stockpile of them that you don't really need them. As I said, I like the Tupolev SB, but early on you actually should be producing a few medium bombers, so you can send the volunteers over. In this case, I recommend to use the range focus designer, because that's just what you need with the Soviets. You need range on every single plane. So put like 3 factories on it. And that is exactly the number we currently have in air production. So with this, you're going to produce some medium bombers. And that is what I meant. You can go for medium bombers, which is easier, less micromanagement of the production. But I prefer the light bombers in the long run. It's just a personal preference there. Alright, probably the most important part about the Soviet Union is choosing the correct construction. This might surprise you, since contrary to what you do in Germany, despite having planned economy and already being on partial mobilization, you should build some civilian industry. And the reason for that is that you can build them in parallel with your military construction, obviously. So building like 5 or maybe 10 civilian industry in Moscow, and also building about 10 to 15 in Leningrad won't hurt you. And obviously, the rest of that construction goes into military factories. It's just a way to more quickly increase your factory count to trigger your focus requirements for the 5-year plan. In terms of military industry construction, I tend towards building some military industry in Kiev, like 2 or 3 military factories here, relatively high in comparison to other states. Infrastructure in Smolensk, for example, and also specifically here in the Donbas region, it's relatively high, but that is a very threatened region when the Germans invade. So either prepare to defend it hard, or prepare to defend it until you can evacuate it. So in Kiev, which is basically undefensible long term, at least on this side of the river. The other side is another story. Build like 2 or 3. I tend towards 4 to 5 I build here that I can then evacuate later on. Rostov, same. So like these 4 here, each 4 to 5. And everywhere else you can go ham, though I recommend to build mainly in these 2 tiles, since they benefit from that long term due to the focuses. Also, see if you can build some factories back here and maybe some infrastructure. Some of these regions will later on be able to mine for additional resources, and you want that. Yeah, you want these additional resources behind the Urals in case the Germans take important locations. This includes Novosibirsk coal mines too. So building some military industry here has some long-term benefits and infrastructure too. So do that. Also, especially in multiplayer, consider to build up some railway connections down south, since your main railway connection down south runs along this river, and the railway connection to Stalingrad is significantly worse. As you can see, it's level 2 and level 1. Consider to upgrade it a bit behind the lines here, so that you can get a level 3 or level, maybe even level 4 connection to Stalingrad, so you won't be struggling with your own supply while defending against the Germans should they push that far. You can also probably upgrade infrastructure here in Azerbaijan, since it's oil, and more oil can be good, but honestly I've never had any issues with the Soviets with oil, so that's up to you. So we have basically covered that. Organization of the army is obviously an important part. Let's be honest here, I just take the whole army and dump it into a single army for the start, and then start splitting them up in tanks and infantry. More important is you have very different templates for some stuff. I prefer a very chunky, hard division as the Soviets too. So field hospital maybe on the infantry, it's a big maybe there. But more importantly, I prefer to have from the start a chunky division that is capable to hold its own against the Germans. So lots of artillery, double anti-tank, hence me producing a lot of anti-tank guns. So that's, for the Soviet, a solid, very strong infantry template. Some players prefer to go a bit less on the infantry or less on the anti-tank and less on the artillery just to save production there. I prefer the chunky divisions. 24 width, obviously. 18 width and 16 width can also work, but 24 width is generally what I prefer for my bigger divisions, since 24 is the optimum width in Ultra. Again, the Mountaineers probably can make sense as elite assault units, but they eat more of your XP, so you have to see if that is worth it, and they need extra equipment to be produced for them, so it's also another matter again. For the tank divisions, I tend to convert all these. First Armored Car Recon, obviously, and you want these to be as strong as possible, so also as much veterancy as possible, since that is in the long term very important for their strength. So all the companies you can get. This is actually fine, and also remember in Ultra, converting these templates doesn't cost you any XP, so playing around with this is absolutely not an issue. So I tend towards something like this. That's a good chunk of artillery. And then currently light tanks. Later on you convert this to basically replace the light tanks with heavy tanks. At the moment 2 light tanks, 3 medium tanks, save that template, and then you take all other tank variants and convert them into this one. That saves you a lot of light tanks, since the mechanical core here is, very tank heavy. I mean 360 light tanks. In comparison to this now, with its 72 light tanks. So you're gonna save a lot of light tanks there that you can then convert into flamethrowers and speed up production of that. And yeah, also just start recruiting. You need them. Max out your manpower as much as you can. For the Air Force, it's basically call them all together, delete initially your medium bomber squadrons, since you need 150 medium bombers to send to China for a decision later on, and you don't want to miss that one since it gives you XP, and it also improves China's performance against Japan, which is good for the allies, of course. Last thing is your intelligence agency is actually doing really well, so you don't need to do much there in terms of construction, especially since these projects take very long. However, once you get Berea in office, I recommend to spend some time there. Initially, construction is more important than this, but long term it probably pays off to have the radio interception group and also to have better army and air force intelligence. Economy civilian can be interesting, but honestly the allies should be able to tell you anything you want to know about the German economy and what they are producing. Yeah, and that's probably about it. I hope you enjoyed it this far, and I'm gonna give you another video on another nation soon. It will likely be Italy. So, I hope you enjoyed it this far. Thank you again for my Patreons and everyone who's watching the Twitch streams and subscribing there. Hope I see you there again, and yeah, bye.